On this episode of MPItv, we're chatting about the Winter 2019 edition of Meetings Outlook, developed in partnership with MGM Resorts International. We're discussing the results of the Meetings Outlook survey on efforts to fight human trafficking and finding out what the meetings and hospitality industry can do to increase levels of awareness. Here to discuss further is Sean Lee with the Shiva Foundation, a corporate anti-trafficking foundation in the UK that is connected to Shiva hotels. Sean, thank you so much for joining us. Could you please talk about the importance of meeting planners engaging the hotel industry and how that can help minimize the levels of risk for human trafficking?
The hotel industry has a few areas of risk, and I think by engaging those that are within the industry itself, we're tackling those areas of risk. So number one, room usage. So guests might be exploited themselves, and that's like sexual exploitation, even domestic servitude, but also staff, figuring out where everybody's coming from and that nobody's indebted or that everybody's getting paid their own wages. That's quite important. And then finally, supply chains, which is, the entire business sector has a responsibility to look at that. And so engaging with hotels on those three risk areas will inevitably mean that we could identify victims and hopefully put them in a situation where they're being rehabilitated and they're coming to a good situation where they're not being re-trafficked, but also to potentially be preventative if we're addressing some of those systems that allow for unpaid wages or indebtedness that I mentioned.
In our Meetings Outlook survey, 66% of respondents were unaware of what is being done by planners to fight human trafficking, and 68% were unaware of how hoteliers and venues are handling it. What are your thoughts on these findings?
In terms of that lack of awareness that you mentioned, I think that's in part because hotels, at least, weren't communicating about what they were doing. So it's no surprise that no one knew about it because they weren't telling anybody. I think that culture still exists. However, I do obviously know some organizations like Meeting Professionals Against Human Trafficking who are doing a lot of great work because they recognize that planners have a phenomenal amount of power. They can leverage hotels in order to answer certain questions, fulfill certain requirements if they're actually going to use that space. As hotels increasingly talk about it, as planners become more and more aware, then the two will just influence each other, and hopefully the whole industry will come aboard and fight the good fight.
Sean, thank you for that insight, and thank you for bringing up the great work that Meeting Professionals Against Human Trafficking is doing. We're actually joined now by the founder of Meeting Professionals Against Human Trafficking, Sandy Buyback. Sandy, how is MPAT getting planners to bring this issue to the table when they're seeking event space or suppliers?
Essentially, what we're asking planners to do, based on a whole lot of research, is in their initial conversations with any venue or supplier, what are you doing about this? And we've developed, in going through our research, and a lot of it has come from MPAT USA, what are some of the questions you can ask on your RFP? So we've developed 3 or 4 of them, and planners can change it for whatever their needs are. So it's a way of opening the conversation. Ultimately, what we want is that all of the venues come back and say, yes, we do training, we're aware of it, here's the process, and so on and so forth.
And what have been some of the biggest challenges that you faced while trying to educate meeting professionals on these issues?
If you go back a couple of years when I first started this, no hotels would talk about it. It was, kept very closely inside. It was kind of like, it's not happening in my backyard. And we've proven that, yes, it is. I think it's important to understand that if you think you do see something, report it. You could be wrong, and that's okay. And you could be right and save a life. And I'm really just thrilled that so many have hopped on to this and have made it part of their corporate social responsibility.
Well, that does it for us on this edition of MPItv. We hope you found this insightful, and be sure to check out the February issue of The Meeting Professional for even more research from Meetings Outlook, developed in partnership with MGM Resorts International.